Drake and Sienna are the picture-perfect couple. Both are blessed with unbelievably good visuals, and people would always do a double take whenever either of them are out and about. When they're together, even more so. Simply put, they're a striking pair. Beyond the looks, both of them are innately good-mannered as well. They are kind, generous, and simply lovable. Because of this, they are very well liked by many. Drake's family doted on Sienna, and Sienna's family, even though they lived far away, only had good things to say about Drake. Everything is going well. All the qualities Drake envisioned for a perfect other half, Sienna possessed. So it didn't come as a surprise to both their parents when Drake informed them that he will be proposing to Sienna during their planned vacation with Drake's family. Unfortunately, Sienna's family can't come, as they can't get away even for a few days due to their thriving business in Italy, where they've lived all their life. Italy is home to Sienna too. She was born and raised there before she traveled the world as a flight attendant. When she met Drake 3 years ago, she decided to settle on American soil to be with the man who made her heart beat like no other. And now, 3 years later, Sienna, Drake, and his family were set to spend an entire week at the beach to celebrate his dad's birthday. It was the very day he met Sienna when they traveled to Hawaii to celebrate his dad's big 5-0. Now, Sienna is traveling with them instead of just bumping into them as she did 3 years ago. Both Drake and Sienna are family-oriented, so there's no issue at all. Besides, Drake's entire family just loves her. Drake's parents knew what he had planned, and can't wait to witness a magical moment between the two who are very much in love. More than that, they're delighted to welcome Sienna as a soon-to-be official member of the family, although she's already treated as one. As part of the surprise, Drake had been studying to speak Italian. He thought it would be more meaningful for Sienna if he popped the question in her native tongue. With this in mind, Drake had been studying the language whenever he got the chance. Almost 4 months later, he can understand most things, although he can't speak fluently just yet. But of course, he endlessly studied how to say, "I love you," and "Will you marry me?" along with other lines that he was sure would make Sienna's heart melt. He planned to propose on their 4th day on the island, which would mark the 3rd year since their eyes met, and neither one of them was able to resist the pull the other had. 2 days before that, they were having lunch at a buffet restaurant when Sienna stood up to get more food. After she left, Drake's mother told him, "Dear, can you please get me a bowl of salad from the bar? My knees hurt with all the walking." More than happy to oblige, Drake stood up and went to do as his mother requested. As he was making his way to the salad bar, he noticed that a man approached Sienna, and she smiled and said something before shaking her head subtly. He thought it was just someone asking something, like where a certain dish is placed or something like that. Coincidentally, he'd have to pass them to get to the bar. As he approached them, Drake winked at Sienna and said playfully, "Hey, love." This isn't something Sienna isn't used to. Drake had always been expressive, and being in public doesn't stop him from doing that. Drake continued walking when he heard the guy speak in Italian before chuckling. He might have heard it wrong, but what he thought he said was, "Is that him?" and said it in a mocking tone before chuckling. It was then followed by, "Will I see you tonight?" followed by Sienna's answer, which went something like, "Maybe, if you behave," and in a playful tone. Drake froze momentarily before he told himself he might have misheard or misunderstood. After all, some Italian words sound alike, and he still isn't familiar with a lot of words that Sienna grew up using. He tried to brush it off and walked towards the table where Sienna was already seated. He tried to join the family's usual banter, but his mind continued to stray to the conversation he'd overheard. Although Drake tried to be his usual jolly self, his mom noticed that he was quieter than usual. Add to the fact that he should be excited and maybe a little restless about his impending proposal, and Drake's mother was a little worried to see her son a little stoic. She chalked it up to nerves, but she too tried to let it go. Sienna, on the other hand, didn't seem to notice the change in Drake. She continued to share stories with Sammy, Drake's twin. After the sumptuous meal, they all got up from the table and went their ways. Sienna and Sammy planned to browse through the stores, while their parents decided to sit in the shade. The others had other plans too. Still thinking back to the conversation he overheard, he didn't seem to realize that he was trailing his parents instead of Sammy and Sienna. It was then that his mum asked him to sit beside her on the lounge chair. "Is there something bothering you, Drake? You seem preoccupied," she asked gently. Drake's father, always in tune with his wife, appeared to have noticed this as well. Yeah, something changed in there, and not in a good way. What is it? Even his dad asked worriedly. They take each other's emotions seriously and would never joke about things. That's what Drake really loved about his family, his parents especially. I'm mulling over something. I'll let you know if and when I can. Don't worry about me, Mom, Dad. Let's enjoy this vacation. Drake tried to sound cheery, and although his parents noticed, they didn't say anything. They knew Drake would come to them if he needed their help. At dinner that night, Sammy and Sienna, who had gotten close over Drake and Sienna's 3-year relationship, were teasing each other. Apparently, they lost track of each other while going in and out of shops, and had been looking for each other for close to half an hour before they finally got reunited. I didn't know where you disappeared to. I just turned my back for a second and you weren't there, Sammy told Sienna without heat. Sienna retorted, yeah, well, it probably wasn't just a second, as you had been staring at the hot guys. Your words, not mine. Everybody laughed at the end. Drake tried to force a smile. He can't help but wonder where Sienna had been during the time she wasn't with Sammy, especially after what he thought he heard Sienna telling the guy she'd see him if he behaved. When everybody has decided to finally call it a night, a very, very late night actually, Sienna and Drake went to their room. It was then that Sienna noticed that Drake was quiet, which is so unlike him. Is something wrong? Are you really tired? She asked. Drake simply said, no. And before he had the chance to change his mind, he blurted out, can you be honest with me? Why? What's wrong? You're beginning to worry me, Drake, said Sienna. Can you promise to answer my questions honestly? Drake asked instead. Of course, came Sienna's answer. At lunch today, did you make plans to meet with that guy again? Drake asked in a soft voice. He was staring at Sienna's eyes all the while, so he saw how Sienna froze, as if she was told with certainty that aliens are real. He also saw how Sienna's lips trembled before she averted her eyes. Drake didn't push. He remained standing, back on the wall, trying not to assume the worst, despite Sienna's very telling reaction. When Sienna finally talked, as she couldn't bear the silence anymore, her voice trembled when she said, how did you know? At that moment, Drake felt his heart clenching very painfully. He thought it was just a very cliché expression, but it turned out it is actually true. At least that's what it felt like. I was learning to speak Italian, so I can greet you on our 3rd anniversary in your native language, Drake said, not about to admit that he was about to propose the very next day. As soon as Drake finished talking, tears fell down Sienna's eyes. She blurted out to Drake's immense pain, I'm sorry, last night I couldn't sleep no matter how hard I tried, so I decided to take a walk. Without me, Drake said softly, hurt evident in his voice. You were fast asleep, so I didn't want to wake you. I took a stroll on the beach when I passed by a bar. I was just planning to drink a little so I'd be sleepy, but this guy who lives in our town recognized me and offered me drinks. I don't know what came to be, but I ended up in his room and sprinted here at dawn so I'd get here before you woke up. And yet you made plans to meet with him again, Drake asked. I'm sorry, Sienna answered, in a voice so soft it was barely audible. But Drake heard it loud and clear. He realized that not all questions needed to be answered. Some questions should be left unanswered. If he knew that earlier, he would have done so. If he did, he wouldn't feel this hurt so bad he felt like throwing up. Instead, Drake moved away from the wall very, very slowly, as if each movement cost him. He stared right into Sienna's eyes, and as he said, I'm getting out and we'll get another room, tears started to fall from his eyes. After he left, Sienna flung herself to the bed and cried herself to sleep. The next morning, Drake knocked on his parents' room, where he was instantly let in. There won't be a proposal, Mom. Dad, please don't ask me anything now. Without saying anything, his mom walked right up to him and hugged him. His dad came next and hugged him briefly. Let's get on with the day and leave after lunch as planned, his dad said quietly. Until it was time to leave, Sienna and Drake stayed in their respective rooms. On the plane ride home, they sat next to each other, but no one attempted to start a conversation. At the airport, Sienna bid goodbye to the group and said that a friend would be picking her up. Drake's mom and dad shared a look, but didn't say a thing. A week later, their hearts broke when Drake finally told them he decided to part ways with Sienna. He provided no explanation and they didn't ask for one. His mom enveloped him with a tight hug while his dad kept his hand on his shoulder as he cried on his mother's shoulders. Meanwhile, Sienna flew back to Italy filled with guilt. She regretted what she did, and even more so when her parents asked to see her engagement ring. Right then and there, she burst into tears. 3 months later, Drake's knowledge of the Italian language turned out not to be a waste after all. He was awarded a big project, and the VIP client turned out to be an Italian businessman who was not that proficient in English yet, so Drake's Italian came in handy. After Sienna left the US, he knew that because Sienna apparently bid goodbye to his sister Sammy, Drake was inconsolable. He was just a step away, literally, from asking her to be a part of his life forever, so the betrayal shook him to the core. It's as if the Sienna he knew and loved all those years was no longer the person he was about to propose to. As Drake nursed his broken heart, he buried himself in work, and his hard work paid off. One day, he was asked to come up to the top floor. He had only been there a couple of times, so he was excited and nervous at the same time. The president's secretary greeted him and motioned for him to enter the room. There sat a middle-aged man who exuded power, confidence, and an aura of enormous wealth. "Have a seat, Drake," said the president. "This is Mr. Romano, and he'd like to work with a detail-oriented and efficient partner, and you came in highly recommended." He introduced himself to the client and shook hands with him firmly. As they were discussing the project, Mr. Romano was having a hard time expressing his ideas to the president because of the language barrier, so Drake drew on his knowledge and tried to help out. This came as a pleasant surprise to both the president and Mr. Romano himself. Months passed, and Mr. Romano was so happy with Drake's work that he invited him to work on a similar project in his home country. Drake's bosses gave the go-ahead, which means that their lucrative partnership with Mr. Romano will continue. Once in Italy, Drake settled in nicely, focused on his work, and visited places on his days off. So far, he hasn't bumped into Sienna yet. After all, Italy's a huge country. Also, he wasn't sure he was ready to meet her again.